Environmental democracy is not about electing a government in 5 years. Environmental democracy is about influencing the decision of the government every day of your life.
It is my great honor to be here today with 2021 Right Livelihood laureates Ritwick, Dutta and Rahul, Choudhary, co-founders of the Legal Initiative for Forest and Environment, which is an organization working to protect the environment in India through the creative use of legal processes. LIFE works with communities through a grassroots approach. It assists and empowers communities to stand up against powerful interests and have a voice in the decision-making process, while also strengthening institutions and reforming laws. Co-founders Ritwick Dutta and Rahul Choudhary have used litigation and capacity building to push for more effective judicial structures, promoting and protecting people's rights to a healthy environment across India. Congratulations to the Right Livelihood Award. So I've been beginning these conversations by essentially asking each of the laureates to tell me their, superhero origin stories, if you will. Who were each of you before you were environmental activists and capacity builders?
So I think I was always in some form an environmental activist. I never intended to do law. I started off being an activist. I was interested in my first voluntary work in the field of environment was actually trying to look at wildlife trade in India, working as an undercover agent to look at how illegal trade in tigers and ivory and elephants take place. And so it was my interest in wildlife and forest-related issues which have always interested me. And so law was only a way in which I can further my activism. So it came in much later. So in fact, I would always say that for me it was activism as first, and I remain primarily as an activist even today.
Yeah, for me, Ritwik was more in the wildlife and then environment. I was more in the rights issues, like the people who were displaced by the hydroelectric projects or mining projects, meeting them and then going to them. So for me as a law, we started as a tool to how to work with them, how to work for them. And in that process, actually, so we build up the relationship with the communities. And at the same time, we had the option, like you go for the movement path, like you develop a movement and then go with the movement, or the another path. So we thought, let the communities lead their movement themselves. And then we as an individual, as a lawyer, we can use a legal tool. And also subsequently, along with the legal, we also took up this scientific assistance and then use this as a assist them to whatever were their rights they're affected to help them out.
How did the two of you come together and decide to found LIFE?
We were incidentally in the same law school, right? We were in the 1996-99 batch of Delhi University Faculty of Law. And after doing law, I, as I said, traveled around the country looking at wildlife issues and all. And then I was offered to write a book by Colin Gonsalves, right, who was the Right Livelihood laureate in 2017. So I was a student in 98, and he told me that, I have a huge task in front of me that, I'm preparing an environmental activist handbook, and I'm looking forward to someone who can volunteer. So, I started doing that work. And in fact, I used to never attend my law school classes and actually do a compilation of environmental judgments for him. And Colin had a very interesting point. He said, well, I want the book to be at least 3,000 pages, right? So, which meant, I spent almost a whole year in the library, just studying all the environmental law judgments and all, putting it, it's essentially a compilation. And, I needed another friend of mine to help, so I requested Rahul come and help me. So that's how we started working on that book together. And later, over a time that I was working with Colin, I realized that, environmental issues, though are very closely linked to human rights issues, there is a need for specialized environmental law practice in India. Because there are issues in which every environmental issue is not a human rights. If you're fighting for an endangered species, you're fighting for the rights of the Asiatic lion, it's a pure wildlife issue. And that's when, me and Rahul, we decided we must formally have, an organization, or at least in some form to do specialized work in the field of environmental law. So it took birth around 2005, realizing that there is no dedicated environmental law group in India.
How did you decide that the law was the tool that needed to be used most? Because, obviously, coming from an activism background, that there's a variety of approaches that can be taken. Why did you think that this was really where, change could be best made?
See, when I first, it was when I was working with Colin itself, as an activist, I ended up going to the Supreme Court once. It was in 2001. And it was a case concerning felling of trees in an island called the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And within that, there was this little island called the Little Andamans. It was a small part. And the issue was about ban on felling of trees because it would affect a local community and a very traditional indigenous community called the Jaravas and the Onges. That case was this big. It was like some 5,000 pages. And petition, and it went to the judge, Justice Kripal, who was then the Chief Justice. And he said, what do you want? And we said, well, we want ban on felling of trees in Little Andamans. And the judge said, Andaman itself is so little, we ban felling of trees in whole of Andamans, right? And I realized that, the power of law, and that time, in 2002, 2001, and I would say the only country in the world which actually set up a dedicated bench every Friday, 2 o'clock, to hear only forest and wildlife matters. So it actually set up a body after that, but it reserved Friday, 2 o'clock, is what came to be known as the forest bench of the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court passed an order stating that we hereby order that no dead, decaying wood, wind fallen trees, or even one grass can be removed from any national park and sanctuary without our approval. And they set up a committee called the Central Empowered Committee, stating that it's difficult for people to come to the Supreme Court. So we set up a body called the CEC, which will comprise of a lawyer, a wildlife activist, a retired bureaucrat, all of them, and scientists and others. Any person in India can approach the CEC if they find that there is a violation of the order of the Supreme Court or any matter of importance for conservation, for wildlife and forest. So we went to that and said, forget the courts, we'll actually go to the CEC. So it was a specialized body, and we were among the first to utilize that forum. And over a period, started filing application before it. It was very simple, and orders would be passed, and it would have, and it would be very strictly complied with because it is treated as an order of the Supreme Court. So we realized that, rather than, I think research is good, activism is good, but we had a forum there, and it's time that we use this forum, and that's how our initial lot of cases started.
The concept of environmental democracy is something that is at the core of your organization's mission. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what that means in practice and why it's why that is kind of the core organizing value for you.
The problem is that there's not much information available with the communities. If you are coming out with the, say, mining project or hydroelectric project, you're not giving them required information. Second is, when they have managed to get required information, maybe with the help of us or some other activists who are working in that area, then they're not able to understand. You make them understand, then whether government is listening to them, whatever their voices are, whether even if the public hearing which is required to be conducted under this law for coming up of any project, where you hear to the voice of the locals, then whether that is happening properly. Now, first was the information, second was that participation in the decision-making process. And so even if they have participated in the decision-making process, whether they are getting what they wanted, and if that not, that what is the further course of action. So obviously it was that you approach either authorities, forums to get the relief. So from there, I think we adopted, you can say, the principle 10 of the Rio Declaration, where you have access to information, participation in decision-making process, and access to justice. And then we thought that we'll have to start and work on all these issues. Like we'll have to work on that, how they should get the proper information, how you can make them empowered to participate in decision-making process, and then help them to access to justice. So first two were like empowering the communities, and third was where we can come into the picture and then help them to get the access to justice. And this is what we say environmental democracy, where whatever is happening with respect to your environment, the communities, individuals, activists, all have a right to say to the government what they want.
You mentioned earlier that all of this is taking place in the context of, letting the community themselves kind of lead, and you guys are providing the support. What does that look like in practice?
See, first, I can share with some example, but before that, in practice, we go to any community, like when we, rather it's other way around. The communities ask us that this is something is happening in our area and how you can help us or make us understand. And then we try to get all the papers. Now, earlier what used to happen is we used to help them write application for getting information. And over the years, so maybe in 2005 to 2010, we have done extensively training programs for the communities, going to them, living with them for 5 days, weeks. And then now the change has happened is now they are themselves getting information from the government. They are now empowered to write their application. And they are very particular that if the information is not given to them, how to approach and appeal to the government. They are now empowered. They can understand the technique, sometimes the technical documents also, which is the environment impact assessment reports for any project which is proposed. And they participate in the public hearing, send their objections to the government. So this much has happened. And also they take the decisions like how to object to the project, whether to object to the project or not. So I think in the process this has happened. I'll just share an example. Like we went to one of the place called Askot in Uttarakhand. It's a Himalayan state. And then a Canadian company, Pebble Creek, proposed to do the gold mining there. And they asked us that we are not able to understand anything what they are going to do here. And in the gold mining, there is one process which we understand at that time. It was 10, 15 years back. So you have to do some kind of a processing on the site. And when we went there, we asked for the documents which is circulated before the public hearing. And that one of the document was in which they have written, they will process the mined out thing on the site with some foam water. So we asked the communities, what is this foam water? What you are going to do? So they said, we have no idea. Then we asked for so we said that whether it's a detergent or something like, which will create some kind of a foam. Then we asked for the English version of that document. And to our surprise and to the surprise of the communities, the English version said, we will process it by cyanide at the site. And then this information to the community was shocking, and they were all like saying that this is going to damage entire our water bodies and then water streams and everything at their field, and they actually strongly objected to that. And they were managed to stop that project by this small information.
Something that, when you're talking about a people-first approach, you were also mentioning earlier that there are pure rights approaches in environmental law that don't necessarily involve the rights of human beings. Are there times when those two can be in conflict when you're trying to balance the needs of preserving an ecosystem against the needs of the people in the community, and how does that work with the environmental democracy concept?
So that's a very important question, and in fact, it's an issue where you have competing interests, competing priorities, and so we also have, as I keep on saying, we have the largest number of people dependent on forest in the world, right? So if you just look at forest-dependent communities in India, the total number of forest-dependent communities exceed the total population of Brazil, Argentina, and Australia combined together. So when you look at it, it's a huge number that one is talking about. We have the highest population of Asian elephants. We have the highest population of tigers in the wild. Now, so you need, and as an organization, we believe that there has to be a space for everyone, right? And it's important, we say as we must move away from what we call as an anthropocentric to a more ecocentric approach. And therefore, in that light, we put priorities. So if there is an endangered species which needs protection, we prioritize that as the highest. The issue is, how do we protect it? By protecting and respecting the rights of communities that depend on those resources. So as LIFE, our motto has been actually to work with communities to find a way out. So if there are certain areas which the elephants are using, we try to use litigation as well as training to convince them that you have to keep the areas that elephants move free of human. Because if you set up a structure there, the elephants will come into your land and it will kill you. So ensuring integrity of wildlife is important for human welfare. And we, as a result of this, we even succeeded to be in part of judgments of the Supreme Court, which actually recognized what is called the species best interest standard. They recognize what is called the need to move away from anthropocentrism to a more ecocentric approach. And therefore, we think that it's possible, because at the end of it, what we have always said is that we have only about 3% of India left for wildlife. And if you could not do human welfare with 97%, you will not be able to bring human welfare by destroying the remaining 3%. And this 3% sustains India's rivers. This is where the bulk of medicinal plants exist. This is where the bulk of very, very important water recharge zones are. So protecting wildlife areas is an important part of protecting human beings also. And so therefore, as an institution, we have a unique position in India of working equally with the strongest and the most vocal human rights group, and to the most hardcore conservation groups, to tribal rights group, and even the government when it comes to protecting and saving these areas.
When you talked about, the kind of new judgment of the Supreme Court, that's something that has, that makes sense with the litigation as a strategy, that you're not only doing things that are preventing or requiring individual actions, but you're also shaping a bigger body of law. When does it, does it occur to you guys that the existing legal structure might not be sufficient, that you actually need to be pushing for, bigger changes, whether that's setting new legal precedents or creating, new laws entirely?
I think there's always a need to bring in new law. I don't think so. We can always say that we have reached the topmost level in terms of refinement. And interestingly, I've been mentioning it since I arrived about 3 days back, that 90% of India's environmental law was an outcome of the Stockholm Declaration. So if you take up any of the law that has been enacted in India, the Air Act, the Water Act, the National Green Tribunal Act, the Environment Protection Act, all the laws that we rely on, they all mention that it is in order to fulfill India's commitment to the Stockholm Declaration. It's a good thing, but the fact is all these laws are of the 1970s vintage, right? None of them are able to meet the requirement of the resilience that we need to build, the adaptation that we need to build in terms of the changing climate. So there is no doubt that we need institutional change, we need legal change. The problem that we see it is whether there's a political will to bring about the change. And whether by pressing for a change, we actually risk losing whatever we have. That's the dilemma that we have. So at one time we want a change, but the fact is, irrespective of the party that has come to power over the last 10 years, 15 years, environmental law have essentially been regressive. The courts, to some extent, have been progressive, but not fully. So it's always a tough balancing act for us, whether we should press for change and end up with a more diluted law, or should we actually work towards strengthening the existing one through creative legal interpretation. So there is a scope, and some of the forward-looking judges have creatively interpreted the law, in order to apply international principles into domestic law. So many of the international principles have become part of domestic law, part of judicial decisions which are binding on every authority, without actual changes in the law itself. So it's always a process that we start and continuously think what is best for us.
This is something that's come up in, I think, all of the conversations that we've been having with laureates, that even if you aren't explicitly trying to protect civil society, if you're working within institutions that are themselves evolving, the role of civil society ends up becoming a large part of what you do. And when you're talking about environmental law getting more regressive over the last 10, 15 years, what has that meant for you guys as an organization? Have you had to rethink your approach, understanding that the climate, the judicial climate, if you will, isn't necessarily as favorable as it was when you started the organization?
See, what we have tried to do, and I think that's one area I would say has been fairly positive, that over the last 7-8 years, we have challenged every single regressive decision of the government when it comes to, diluting environmental law. And almost, I would say, 99% instances, we have got favorable orders. So, for example, 4 years back, the government decided to come out with what is called a law to make Indian building and construction sector comply with the Paris Agreement. So they came out with a law saying, we want to bring in climate resilient infrastructure in building and construction. And we want to ensure that laws related to building and construction sector are in compliance with the Paris Agreement. This looks very wonderful, but the law says that from henceforth, no building and construction will require the permission under the Air Act, the Water Act, and the environmental impact assessment, right? And so we said, well, this is absurd, right? It's absurd because in order to comply with Paris Agreement, your action is to do away with environmental law. We went to the court saying, well, you should exclude every sector, because if that is India's stand, why should you not apply to every sector? Because if that is the way to comply, and the only thing that stops compliance with environmental law or Paris Agreement is applying environmental law, you should then have it for every sector. The court understood the absurdity of this argument, and they stayed the government's order. And I think later, about 2 years back, they came out with a law called post facto approval. That means rather than taking approval before a project, you are at liberty to start the project, complete the project, and then take approval, right? So we managed to get a judgment again saying that is in fundamental contradiction to the basis of environmental law and the rule of law, right? That you cannot, do away with prior approval. The whole body of environmental law, or for the matter, rule of law, collapses if you take post facto approval. So for us, not just as LIFE as a group, but across India, we made it as a point that every single regressive decision, a year and a half back, the government came out with a new law, a draft law on EIA, the environmental impact assessment, which actually legitimizes every single wrong act by saying you need not actually, it's more about exemptions. Because it was a draft law, we could not challenge the law in court. So what we did there was to insist that under Indian law, the government is required to publish a law in two languages. One is in English and second is in Hindi. We went to the court saying that there are 22 recognized languages in India. You have to translate it in at least 22 languages. And people will send their comments on this. The government said that it's very interesting. It went to the court said, make it available in 22 language. The government said, it will create interpretational error because we do not have capacity to translate a law written in English to Indian languages. And as a result, for 1.5 years till date, they have not been able to finalize the law because they have not been able. And our strategy is simple. You have at least 200 languages in India. And if your law is affecting them, they have the right to read the draft law and comment on the law. And therefore, the Delhi High Court passed an order saying, make it available in at least 22. By at least means minimum 22. And if they do it in 22, we will demand for 200. So this is where we are. And he said, yes, it affects us. And as the question that you asked, that is what environmental democracy is. Environmental democracy is not about electing a government in 5 years. Environmental democracy is about influencing the decision of the government every day of your life. And every law that is passed has to be actually approved by the people and not just members of parliament.
I mean, as much as in this particular case, the impossibility of creating a law that everyone in the country could understand, like in this case, obviously that helped you, but it's also, it seems, a very big challenge for any group trying to do awareness building, right? Like how do you educate a country that is so large and has so many different groups and where there are so many different challenges? What does that educational process even look like?
So for us, we work as a group with partners across the country. See, I can speak only 3 Indian language, right?
Only 3?
The only 3, that's it. I can speak Bengali, which is my mother tongue. We can speak Assamese, which is a place that I was born in. And I speak Hindi, that's all. I don't speak another one. So if I have to at least communicate in 22 language, I would need at least 22, 21 partners. And so therefore, we as an institution, we carry out training programs, as Rahul was saying, on almost every month, at least 2 trainings we do for communities to tell them about this law. We cannot trust the government. So we do that training, which essentially should have been the government's job if they're coming with the law, but we take it to them. But the model that we have followed is this training will be done only in collaboration with a grassroots group. That group will identify who will be the potential participants. Those potential participants and the participants will not be the person on the ground, but someone who can train further the people on the ground. So therefore we train. So our idea has been that in the whole year, our idea is that we should be training about 2,000 people in the whole year with the hope that after 2 years, based exclusively on the training, we will be able to have at least 20 people who will now dedicate their work to the cause of environment. And I think if in one state in India we are able to have one person who knows environment law, at least 40% of the violations can be checked, and it has happened. So we have a very conservative target, create 20 people, not more than that. But for that we have to bring in at least 2,000 people or 1,000 people. Each training is about 80 to 60 people and is spread over the whole year. But 20 is if you have 20, you'll just look at it in 10 years, you would have 200 people, who are working in the field of environmental democracy. And so they carry on the work, which we in Delhi, we will not be able to do at the grassroots level.
This is something that has come up in conversations with other laureates, that when you're trying to do mass outreach and education, but also trying to follow the lead of affected people, that those two can sometimes, it can be unclear which comes first. When do you decide that it's worth it to make sure that people understand the scope of a threat or understand their rights? And, or are there times when you feel that there is just not enough local support and you don't want to be the only people on the ground speaking for a community that might not be in support?
So we do not take an ideological ground, or we do not select individual entities or projects and all for targets. What we do is, we know that there is a project that's likely to come up. So I'll give you an example. Say a hydropower project comes up. Our role as a group is not to tell them, do not let this power project come up. We go and tell them that the government document says that the affected people will be the people whose land will be submerged. So they are called the people whose land is in the dam reservoir. So they are considered as what is called affected people in India. As a group, we go, because everyone whose land is submerged know that they're affected. Our role is actually different. We go and tell, the government has told you that there is an impact because your land, everything will go underwater. But studies have shown that the total number of people who are impacted because of a hydropower project is 5 times downstream of the project and not upstream of the project. So when you stop the flow of water, right, so what happens in all these projects is what is called run of the river scheme. So you have, for 20 hours the water is stored and for 4 hours it is released. So for 20 hours the water in the river downstream is dry, and suddenly they open it. And when is that suddenly is never told, because it depends on peak demand. So if there is a cricket match at 7 o'clock in the evening, there's an excess electricity demand, they pull the gates for water to be released so that the turbines can move. That kills people directly who have not been warned. That runs, they take away cattle which are then grazing in the dry riverbed. And it finishes the entire aquatic system, because fishes are not used to a daily fluctuation of 17 meters in the level of water every single day. So we explain to them what is called diurnal fluctuation. So you will have water that is going up and down with no advance. So you have signboards saying, in a country like India, do not go near the river. Now, if you do not, river communities have been there for thousands and millions of years. The dam builders have come in together. They are going to say tomorrow and today, you go to the river at your own risk. So therefore, our role has been to tell them, ask these questions. So therefore, as LIFE, our work is, if there are projects that are coming upstream in Arunachal and there's a downstream state of Assam, we work towards the downstream to say the government has not been very fair and transparent in terms of telling you about the true impact. The community then mobilizes itself. And litigation is the last. They first make it as a political issue. They make it as a public movement. And political parties also play later on a role, because they know that in order to get the votes from the downstream area, I need to convince the people that the project is either good or I will abandon the project.
This is actually something that I wanted to ask more directly about, because earlier you mentioned working even with the government to protect the environment, but also, of course, litigation means you're taking a confrontational approach. How do you decide when to be conciliatory and when to actually publicly fight against the government?
See, all litigations in India is directed always against the government. There's always the state is the respondent in every matter. Under Indian law, a private person is presumed not to be guilty because it is the government that has allowed the entity to, violate the law, which is actually true in most instances. Our role with the government has been one. We believe that there are good officers in the government. Right? There are people who are willing to stand up, but they do not have the protection. So as an organization, we spend a good amount of time, training forest and environmental officers about the law. what we found is, they have been in working for 20 years and they did not even have a copy of the law that they were supposed to. And when I was a student doing my environmental law practice, my professor at that time, asked a very interesting question. He said, why do forest officers in India don't know the Forest Act? Right? And everyone started giving an answer, and he answered, it's one very simple reason. They believe that they are the law. Right? So because you are wearing a uniform, what you say is the law. So we believe that, the change has to start at the government level. So there's nothing wrong. So they are also human beings. So we say that, at the end, a court order also has to be implemented by an officer on the ground. So therefore, we spend a good amount of time in their training institutes, training them, sharing with them. And I can share even here that, it's one of the best and the most useful inputs for cases have always come from the government officials who share them in their private capacity. They tell us at times, this is the question that you should ask me. And this is why you should hold me responsible in the court. I will then disclose what all is happening. So therefore, this partnership, I would not say all officers are like this, but a good number are there. And so as an institution, we have believed that the key to environmental protection is good governance. And governance is possible only if one works with every single agent. And when they go wrong, we have never spared them. So we have a very clear one that they will have to be held accountable. We always say, send them to jail to send the message across that, we will not be spared.
You're talking about a lot of, very long-term projects, right? I mean, obviously litigation can often take a great deal of time. And if you're talking about, building relationships with government or training people, these are, years-long approaches. How do you deal with kind of rapidly emerging threats?
See, all issues training is a long term, but also what happens when we go for the training, immediately they tell us 10 issues to be taken up. So me and Rahul, we were there after the announcement of the Right Livelihood Award to a place where it's called Mandarmani in West Bengal. We were doing a training on CRZ, the Coastal Regulation Zone. We took to the community, which is a fishing community. For the first time, they came to know there's a law in India, framed in 1991, which says you cannot do any construction within 500 meters of the high tide line. So immediately someone said, well, we didn't know about it. There are so many constructions happening. There's a resort, and we could see it from the window. There's this resort which is coming up just 3 months back, they started work. And it is within 5 meters of the high tide line. What do we do? So we said, well, if you are agreeable and if you want to do it, as a community you meet. The community met and said, we want to litigate and stop it. Within 1 week, we filed a litigation. And yesterday, the National Green Tribunal, which is the environmental court, has directed the district magistrate to go to the site, meet with the fisherfolk, and submit a report as to why this structure can be allowed to continue. So in almost, I would say that it is, in most instances, of firefighting operations. Before I came in, we were fighting a case to save 11,000 trees. We got an injunction order. The injunction order operates only for 2 weeks, within which, we will have to file a fresh case with new data about protecting 11,000 trees in a very, very sensitive area in the Himalayas. So, it is a continuous one. And through this interaction only, we come to know which issues to be taken up. Also very important, and I can just share with you, we happen to be one of the few, I would say, to be more conservative, few countries which gives a right of appeal. That means that whenever a project is approved in India, whether it's a mining project, whether it's a hydropower project, whether it's a road project, every person in India has a right to challenge that. Any person. And the law has been interpreted saying that you need not be an Indian, you can be residing anywhere in the world. So a person who's a Canadian citizen challenged a project in India and the court upheld the right to challenge it. And when they challenge that, the issue is you have only 90 days from the date of approval. So every week, every month, we file cases on behalf of communities and affected people, challenging it because the law says that you have to come maximum within a period of 90 days from which the approval has been communicated to you, but not thereafter. So there are a lot of issues that we take up on a daily basis.
If you're doing that kind of volume of work, obviously we've been talking about some of your victories, but just kind of numerically, it seems like there have to be some setbacks and you're not going to win every time. How do you deal with setbacks, and when do you decide to keep fighting versus, are there ever times where it just is clear that, further effort would be wasted? How do you make that choice?
So there are a few things, and let me clarify that, we don't win many cases. I'll be very honest about it. And, in fact, after we got the Right Livelihood Award, a lot of people started interviewing to know how it has been. And I said that, we have a reputation which no lawyer in the world can beat, right? We lost continuously 70 cases for 4 years, right? 70 altogether in one go, and so we lost a lot of them. We continue to lose. But I think what's very important we see it is, if there's a community that wants to object to a project, we never say no. Right? Because unfortunately, despite having such a vibrant legal system, court and institution, there are hardly any environmental lawyers full-time in India. So it is impossible for us to say no to them. Usually they reach us, on the 88th day. We have 1 day to prepare. When I interact with lawyers in European countries and in US, they say, well, we work for 1 year for a case. I said, we work for 1 hour on a case, right? And so many a times, our petition is very simple, a copy and paste of the earlier one. It once happened to me in court many, many years back. I went for a case, and by mistake, I picked up the wrong file, right? And I was before the judge. And so as he said, please start your arguments. I said, I'm sorry, but I by mistake took up, because the petitioner's name was the same, but the project was different. So I said, what to do? I said, Lordship, may kindly give me some time. So the opposite lawyer for the company said, well, Mr. Dutta can continue with his argument because, his petitions are always the same, right? His grounds are the same, everything is same. So I stood up and said, well, I accept it. Because irrespective of the project, your EI report is also the same. The government's clearance order is also the same. So why should I be making effort? Because even if it is a project, and that's calls it, when we were challenging projects set up in the state of Maharashtra, right? There were EI reports prepared for the state, which is the state where the capital is Mumbai. And they copied EI reports from Russia. And the state stated that the social commitment of the project proponent is that they will not use prison laborers from Siberia, right? They said that the dominant reptile species is the Siberian salamander, and this area is covered in snow for 8 months in a year. So this is how it was happening. So for us, it's not a choice we have. So volume, but to your question, we prioritize, number one, issues concerning rural areas more than issues concerning urban areas. We prioritize issues which concerns ecologically sensitive area and areas which have particularly vulnerable population. So if we are stuck in work, we'll say, okay, it's an urban pollution issue, we'll take it up. But if we are time constrained, we'll rather do it for communities who don't normally have lawyers. We believe that there are a lot of other lawyers who can take up urban pollution issues in Delhi and others because they give a lot of media coverage to them. We will rather put our effort in cases concerning the remotest part of India. And that's why 90% of our litigants are from the remotest part of India.
Just to add, I think it's mostly the communities who are coming to us. It's not that we are going that, see, you file cases. It's most of the time, this community is coming to us. And first thing is, if you are taking up any movement, if you have a strong movement to continue. So rather, if you feel that you can lead that path, so we ask them that it's better that if you can have a strong ground there and then get the things changed. And then, and also we give them an option that you have an option where you stand, we weigh the cases, and then that here we stand with respect to how are the legal grounds strong, and then if you want to go to the legal way, and then we can also assist. Because many a time if the movement is too strong, and then if you go take a legal path, and then because in the legal path also you don't know that how it will end. For example, the POSCO project, one of the largest investment in the country, there the movement on the ground was too strong. And then when they came first, we said that it's better you continue your movement because we don't know the fate. And this was the phase where Ritwick was mentioning, we lost almost 70 cases. So we said that you can see the fate here, we don't know the future. So if your movement is grounded in strong, you continue with the movement. And they continued with the movement, and we supported them with the material, with what are the problems with the projects and how they can raise their voices. But what happened is, after that, there was a second phase of clearance permissions which were granted. And that was challenged before the court. And then those were really stark things which came before the court, actually. And that time, this 4-year phase was over, and then we got some positive results. Like in that, the survey was done of the flora and fauna. They recorded in their report that it was done from helicopter. So those kind of things which were there, and then on the basis of that, court asked to form the committee and asked to look into this. So it's always a community's decision that which path they are more interested to take up.
It seems like as an organization, you guys have chosen, have made a lot of choices that, taking cases where you only have an hour to prepare and not saying no to people who are coming to you. These are the reason that other organizations don't do this is because they just don't have the resources or capacity, even psychologically often. How do you individually maintain the energy to continue fighting when you're losing 70 cases in 4 years?
We don't have a choice. Many of these litigants and others, sit straight in our office like a climate strike. So they sit in front of our office till we don't file them, they don't leave us. Right? So we get about 50 missed calls from them. They keep on badgering us. And so it's a very good sign for us that, there are people who are willing. And so we can never say no to them. The only thing that we do is a kind of a verification check as to, who they are. Because a lot of them, we don't know the background. So we don't know whether it's a rival company that wants to file a case against it. And it's happened. We have to be clear that they will not withdraw the cases later. So this is the kind that we spend more time, finding out. And few things that we look forward to is we keep a close watch on what the person is wearing, what kind of watch the person is having, so that we know exactly whether it's a vested interest case. Because one of the things that has happened over the 1,000 cases we have done is we always say at no point the court or anybody has been able to tell us that, we have done it in order to settle a person's score or on behalf of some other rival company. So this is the kind of verification we need to do. Rest of it usually doesn't take much time because the nature of violations is very similar, the issues that we raise, and we also have time to add on to our grounds later on. So it's like a post office, you are, getting into a bus, then later on you can do what you want. So we take permission to add new ground. Also very important is that, litigation allows movements to grow. So for example, the case concerning Vedanta, for example, of the UK-based mining company, at that time when the litigants came to us and we took the case, nobody in the country knew that there was a company called Vedanta that wants to do mining. It had taken us close to 8 years before we actually got a positive order from the court. But from the first time when I appeared in the matter, I had no idea what this company is about. The media didn't know about it. But even in our losses, the cases, initially we lost the cases, the media started publicizing it. The public movement started growing. And then the international community came against, it. So litigation itself gives a breathing space or time for other things to develop. So it becomes a political issue, it becomes an issue for the media, and most importantly, it becomes an international issue. So, all of them can play a very complementary role. So I would never say that because of litigation, you can ever win an issue permanently. It is a sum total of everything combined together.
This brings me to something that, again, has been coming up in conversations with laureates that, often in practice, you're stopping things from happening. And preventing or, trying to claw back something that has already started. Is there room in your work for finding, new alternatives, for coming up with solutions? What role does that play?
So, first and foremost, the fact is that, as I said to you, that, what is important is that the law gives you a right of appeal. That means the moment a project is approved, you can appeal against it and challenge the project. Our estimate is about roughly, between 400,000 to 500,000 projects are approved in India, right? The combined might of all civil society group in India is to challenge about 50 of them, at the most 100. Right? In that 100 that is challenged, you will win 5 maximum. So when the judges also ask them, well, it's actually this 5 or 7 is the victory. So I'll be honest about it. It is not that projects stop in that number. It is only about 0.1% that actually gets challenged. And within that percentage, only few of them get stopped. But what is important here is that it is not that every single project is problematic in India, right? It is some of them which are problematic, and those have been challenged. And in the process, some of them do get approved, right? But with certain mitigation, which can be positive. So in certain areas, the height of the dams were reduced so that the area of submergence is reduced. In certain areas, we also give them opportunities and options. For example, the recent case we are doing, on highway constructions, we are saying and we are accepting that you give areas, construct flyovers for the vehicles can go from the top, and you can have elephants and animals moving from below. So they are now accepting that it is possible to come out with infrastructure which recognizes the need to respect nature and at the same time have it. Like for coal mining, we are saying, well, only about 10% of India's coal is actually found in dense forested area, right? So you can avoid doing coal mining in that 10% dense forest area, and you can actually utilize your existing coal mines, which have been only used 40% of the capacity before you open up new areas. So we are also giving possible solutions. We are also saying, do we need more hydropower project or coal-fired power plants? Because for the last 3 years, India has become energy surplus. India is now producing excess energy, excess power that it is now exporting it to Bangladesh. But 300 million people don't have access to electricity, which is a distribution problem, and it is not a generation problem. So if you invest in proper distribution, prevent theft of electricity, and ensure that there is last mile connectivity, 300 million people who have electricity. But the answer to electricity is not to have more power plants unless you have dealt with the issue of proper distribution. Every day, there is almost huge amount of extra surplus electricity for which there are no takers. So in the electricity exchange, India's market says there is no demand for electricity, but people don't have access. This is what we try to tell the courts, the government. Mostly unsuccessfully, but we hope that, sometimes good sense will prevail.
We are almost at the end of our conversation, which is extremely frustrating to me. I keep saying this to the laureates, but I'm totally going to pump you for information after this. But I wanted to ask, when you have as many, setbacks as you have, and thinking about your work as individuals, when do you just on a daily, weekly basis, how do you define success for yourself and manage to, feel good enough about the work to keep going?
I can share one. I just saw the picture day before yesterday. And this was a case concerning the black-neck crane. We were fighting for a habitat of a black-neck crane. It comes from China to a wintering site in India. So there were 7 cranes that come to the eastern state of Arunachal Pradesh. There was a plan to have a big hydropower project at the very same site. The environmental impact assessment report was done in the summertime and the birds come during winter time. The local Buddhist community regard this black-neck crane as an embodiment of the Dalai Lama. Right? And we were doing the case to protect this site. And, it was a case that went for 3 years. We had a very bad luck, right? That for the 3 years that the case was going on, the birds decided not to come to the site. And the opposite side would just say, well, there's no birds. And finally, the judge got really fed up because we kept on delaying the case, kept for many, many years for some reason or the other. And he finally said, on this particular day in December, we will have the last hearing and then reserve the judgment. And he said very clearly that you have failed to prove your point that the birds are there because 6 of them come, but they've not been coming for 3 years. It's not an exaggeration, but the fact is on the day the case was listed, 1 day before that, the birds arrived. Right? And the newspaper covered it, saying, black-neck cranes arrive at the hydropower site, stake claim to the project site. And we won the case on that ground. And yesterday, the same black-neck cranes arrived at the same site. My friend from that area sent me the picture. And I think these things inspire. So when I see those 2 cranes, I realize that, from all the cases that we do, at least we bring about changes to some of them.
That is super great. Thank you so much. That's a great, great closing image for us. Thanks very much to Ritwick, Dutta, and Rahul Choudhary for sharing your experiences. I hope that this is not taken the wrong way, but I feel like I don't have to read the 8,000-page environmental law handbook. I've downloaded all of the information that I can get, not just about the specifics of your work, but about the role of legal institutions in accomplishing change. And I really appreciate sharing your insights with us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to the Right Livelihood Foundation and to Kulturhuset. And have an excellent day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.